Mirror Talk Episode 22: Inherited Tongues, Family Language, Ancestral Phrases, and Transgenerational Linguistic Healing. Welcome back to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. Before you ever learned to form a word, someone else's words were already shaping your world. Before your first yes or no, you had already absorbed the rhythm of approval and disapproval through tone, silence, size, and subtle shifts of breath. We are born into a soundscape, not a blank page. The air is already thick with language before we take our first inhale. The echo of those who spoke before us. Some families speak in warmth, others in warning. Some teach you to whisper what hurts, others to laugh it off before the pain has even landed. And so, long before you chose your own vocabulary, your nervous system learned its first language, the grammar of safety and fear. This episode isn't just about the words we use. It's about the words that were used, the ones that became internal walls and bridges, lullabies and leashes. It's about the tone of inheritance, how a family's unsaid things echo louder than its stories, and how language becomes both heirloom and haunting. A soft beginning. You may notice how, when you speak certain phrases, something happens in your body. A tightening in your jaw, a heat in your chest. A subtle drop in your belly when you repeat something your mother said, something that used to sound safe, but now carries the weight of her own exhaustion. These are the ghosts of grammar, ancestral phrases that travel not through DNA, but through repetition. They are linguistic fossils, phrases preserved by fear, shaped by love, and polished by survival. And if you listen closely enough, you can hear how your family's survival strategies became your speech patterns. You learn to say, "It's fine," not because it was fine, but because that was the only way safety could be restored. You learn to say, "We don't talk about that," not because there was nothing to say, but because silence was the only peace your household could afford. Language carries lineage. Every word we use is an artifact, and every tone, a transmission. The unspoken tongue. When we talk about trauma, we often think of what was done or said, but so much of it lives in what was never spoken. Whole generations swallowed words they were never permitted to form, grief that had to hide in gestures, tenderness that was smuggled through humor, anger that fermented into sarcasm. You may have grown up decoding tone more than words, sensing danger in a sigh, shame in a silence, love in an apology that never came. This is linguistic inheritance at its rawest, a nervous system attuned to micro-intonations because speech itself was not a safe space. That's why, when you try to speak your truth today, your throat might tighten, or your words might shake. It isn't a weakness, it's memory. It's your body remembering that once upon a time, expression came with a cost. So we start this episode not by talking about language, but by listening to it. Noticing the subtle scripts you inherited, the ones you quote unconsciously when you're hurt, ashamed, or trying to belong. The tone between generations. Maybe your grandmother's or grandfather's voice was a melody of endurance, every word carried with quiet grace but unspoken exhaustion. Maybe your mother or father's voice carried an undertone of suppressed grief, which turned into sharpness when he felt powerless. Maybe your mother's or father's tone was light and bright because brightness was her camouflage. Whatever their register, those voices didn't just shape your language, they shaped your physiology. When we speak, we regulate. When we listen, we adapt. Over time, we begin to mirror what keeps us safe, not what keeps us true. This is the strange tenderness of inherited tongues. They taught us how to survive long before they taught us how to connect. The goal of this conversation is not to blame those who came before us, but to understand what they were protecting when they passed those words down. Because before language became legacy, it was an adaptation. The soundtrack of survival. Some words hum beneath the surface of every family. Be strong. Don't be selfish. Keep the peace. Don't make a fuss. At first, these seem harmless, moral even. But beneath each one is an unspoken rule. Suppress your needs. Shrink your pain. Smile for belonging. When these phrases are repeated often enough, they stop being advice and become architecture. They build the inner house of your identity, each room furnished with expectations, tone, and taboo. By adulthood, you're not just speaking your mind, you're inhabiting their syntax. And yet within that architecture lies a key, awareness. Because once you recognize the scaffolding of your family's language, you can start to rebuild the emotional home from the inside out. That's what Inherited Tongues invites you to do. Not demolish what was built, but to restore what was lost in translation. To remember that healing is not the absence of old words, it's the reauthoring of their meaning. The living archive, our ancestors didn't have the vocabulary we have now. They couldn't speak about trauma, regulation, attachment, or inherited stress. Not because they were ignorant, but because language itself was still catching up to human pain. So they spoke through symbols, tone, and ritual. They prayed, they cursed, they hummed lullabies while afraid. And in doing so, they passed us a broken, beautiful language, half protection, half prison. You are that language's evolution. You are the first generation, perhaps, who can speak openly about what once had to stay quiet. You are the bridge between what was swallowed and what is finally said aloud. And with every conscious word you speak, you are teaching your nervous system and your lineage a new grammar of safety. So as we move into element 1, we begin not with the intellect, but with the body, tracing where these inherited words live within us. Because language is not just cognitive, it's cellular. The same phrases that once triggered protection can, through awareness, become portals to presence. Take a breath. Notice the tone of your inner voice right now. Is it hurried, apologetic, or calm? That tone is not random, it is remembered. Let's begin by exploring where your family's voice ends and your own begins. Element 1. The ancestral linguistic imprint, where family voice becomes identity. Before you ever spoke your own name, someone else spoke you into being. They named you, corrected you, soothed or silenced you. Their words drew the early borders of your belonging. Language wasn't something you learned, it was something you breathed in. Every sigh, every sentence, every story told around the dinner table became part of your nervous system's operating code. You absorbed not only what your family said, but how they said it, why they said it, and what they refused to say at all. This is the ancestral linguistic imprint, the invisible software running beneath your conscious speech. It's the family dialect of emotion, the generational script of survival. Inherited scripts, the voice beneath the voice. You didn't just learn vocabulary, you inherited a strategy. Your family's words taught you when to speak, when to stay silent, and how much of yourself it was safe to show. If you grew up in a household where calmness kept the peace, you might have learned to speak softly, not out of gentleness, but out of fear of escalation. If you grew up with parents who argued to assert control, you might have learned that only volume earns attention. If love were conditional on pleasing others, your tone may still bend toward appeasement. Each of these is a dialect of safety, your nervous system's translation of emotional history. And what's remarkable is that these translations are rarely conscious. They appear in the microtones of your speech, the half smile before a difficult word, the apology that slips into every request, the tension that rises in your throat mid-conversation. You think you're choosing your words, but often your words choose you. The grammar of survival family language isn't merely linguistic, it's biological. When you repeat a familiar phrase, your body recognizes it before your mind does. That's why certain words, when spoken aloud, can make your chest tighten or your stomach drop. It's not superstition, it's cellular memory. Consider a simple example. A child grows up hearing, "Don't cry, you're fine." At first, it sounds like care, a parent's attempt to soothe. But beneath the phrase is a nervous system command. Suppress the signal of distress. That child's body learns that safety equals silence. And in adulthood, even a gentle "you're fine" can activate the same suppression reflex, cutting off tears before they even reach the surface. This is linguistic conditioning at a physiological level. The language of your caretakers became the blueprint for your emotional regulation. It's how the grammar of survival becomes the architecture of identity. Repetition as ritual. Every family has its mantras, not always spiritual but deeply ritualistic. Phrases like, "Life's not fair. You just have to get on with it." "People don't need to know your business. We're not the kind of people who complain." These sentences are more than habits of speech. They are collective nervous system agreements. They protect the family's image, regulate collective anxiety, and maintain unspoken hierarchies. When repeated over generations, they take on a mythic power. They become truth, not because they're accurate, but because they've been reinforced by emotional necessity. You learn not to question them, because questioning them meant destabilizing the system that fed and sheltered you. So, instead, you repeated them, perhaps even as jokes or reassurances. But every repetition strengthened the neural pathway of obedience over authenticity. Language, in this way, becomes both a coping mechanism and a cage. The family voice lives in the body. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the tone of your mother's voice when she was disappointed, the rhythm of your father's footsteps before he spoke, the sound of your own voice when you tried to stay small, to keep things calm. Now notice, do you still carry those tones when you speak to others, or even when you speak to yourself? This is what it means to inherit a voice-body loop. The words and tones of our families are stored in our musculature, our breath, our posture. When we feel stress, we don't just think, we recite. Our tongues become ancestral instruments, replaying scripts that once kept someone else safe. You might notice it when you comfort a friend with the same phrase your parent used on you, or when you catch yourself saying, "I'm fine," through clenched teeth. The family voice lives on, not just in memory, but in muscle memory. And the work of linguistic healing begins with becoming aware of those echoes, not condemning them, but translating them. Linguistic loyalty, the hidden contract. There's a strange loyalty that keeps us speaking in the voices that hurt us. It's not weakness, it's love. To speak differently from one's family can feel like betrayal. It can sound like ingratitude, rebellion, or even arrogance. So we carry their tone as proof of belonging. We mimic their phrasing as a kind of unconscious grief ritual, a way to keep them close, even when their words once wounded us. We confuse repetition with reverence. But true loyalty doesn't mean imitation, it means evolution. To rephrase the words of those who came before you is not to dishonor them, it's to fulfill their deepest wish, for you to live with more freedom than they could. Inherited language as emotional DNA. Think of every family's language as a genetic code made of words instead of molecules. Each phrase carries instructions: how to love, how to fight, how to recover. When you look closely, you'll see the mutations, adaptations formed by scarcity, grief, or social pressure. A family that endured war might speak in brevity and command. A lineage shaped by poverty may speak through practicality and endurance. A household defined by repression might communicate through implication instead of honesty. These linguistic mutations are brilliant acts of survival, but they also limit evolution. Because when danger fades and safety arrives, those same speech patterns become outdated defenses. We keep fighting ghosts with inherited grammar. Healing means updating the emotional software, honoring the code, but rewriting the command. Reflection prompt. Listening for the lineage, take a moment to reflect. What family phrase do I still repeat? And what truth does it protect me from? It might be a saying like, keep your head down, or don't get your hopes up. Or perhaps everything happens for a reason, a phrase that once soothed uncertainty, but now silences inquiry. When you hear yourself say it, pause. Ask, whose safety am I protecting by keeping this phrase alive? Is it still serving you, or are you serving it? If language is the architecture of thought, then family language is the foundation, poured before we ever had a choice about its shape. Each generation adds a layer, a new tone, a new silence, a new way of saying I'm okay when they aren't. We inherit not only the words but the emotional logic behind them. And this is what makes inherited language so tricky to detect. It feels normal. It's the invisible wallpaper of identity. How family words become internal laws. Think of the phrases you heard most often growing up. They may have sounded like encouragement, but carried a hidden rule. You can do anything you put your mind to. Unspoken law. Failure equals lack of effort. Be nice. Unspoken law. Don't express anger. It threatens love. Don't talk back. Unspoken law. Obedience equals worthiness. These weren't lessons in the classroom sense. They were neural laws, wired through repetition and reinforced by emotion. Each time you conformed, you felt safe. Each time you resisted, you felt shame or fear. And so, without realizing it, language became your earliest behavioral training ground. Your brain didn't store words, it stored consequences. By adulthood, you might not remember who first said it, but your body still obeys the command. Inherited silence. The words we were never given sometimes. What we inherit is not speech, but silence. Whole emotional categories erased from family vocabulary. Grief, vulnerability, boundaries, joy. When emotion has no name, the nervous system struggles to process it. You can't regulate what you can't articulate. So the body steps in to speak on your behalf through tension, illness, avoidance, or emotional shutdown. A lineage that never said I'm sorry may pass down a nervous system that over-apologizes. A family that forbade crying may pass down descendants who dissociate during loss. When we cannot speak our pain, our biology becomes our language. And yet this too is survival, a language without words, keeping the system intact. To recognize this silence isn't to resent it, it's to translate it back into sound. Every time you name what was once unspeakable, you give voice to the generations that swallowed it. The sacred role of the linguistic bridge builder. Every lineage eventually produces a bridge. Someone who begins to hear the dissonance between inherited words and inner truth. That person is often called too sensitive, too analytical, too different. But what they are, in truth, is an evolutionary necessity. They are the linguistic bridge builder, the one chosen or destined to end the echo. They hear that the family's "we're fine" isn't fine. They sense that we don't talk about that carries unprocessed grief. And through awareness, they start to build a new syntax of safety. This role can feel isolating at first, because every word you rewrite risks rejection from those still fluent in the old dialect. But that discomfort is the price of translation, of converting generational trauma into generational wisdom. Your task is not to silence the old language, but to expand it to become bilingual in healing. Family language as nervous system synchrony. Every family is an orchestra of tones, breathing patterns, and emotional cadences. Even before words, you were attuning to their rhythm. How long they paused before answering, how their breath changed when they lied, how laughter could cover tension like a soft rug over cracked flooring. In nervous system terms, this is called co-regulation, the biological synchrony between humans through voice, gaze, and gesture. But in family systems, co-regulation can become co-dysregulation. If fear or guilt were dominant in the household, your nervous system learned to mirror those states to belong. That mirroring becomes your baseline tone, what feels normal, even if it's anxious or constricted. So when you later encounter a calm, regulated voice, it can feel unnerving rather than safe. Your body mistakes peace for distance because it was trained to equate tension with connection. This is why inherited language is not just heard, it's felt. It is the rhythm that taught your heart how fast to beat in the presence of love. The emotional code hidden in everyday phrases. Let's decode a few common family phrases, not to judge them, but to reveal their nervous system logic. What will people think? Defines belonging as conditional based on performance. Don't be silly, you're overreacting, is defined as your perception threatens stability. We don't talk about that in this house, is then speech equals danger. Be grateful, others have it worse, dismisses and suppresses the need to maintain belonging. You're just like your father or just like your mother, signals to identity and inherited guilt or pride. Each phrase is a nervous system algorithm designed to keep order within an emotional ecosystem. And because we internalize that order, it continues to shape how we interpret ourselves long after we've left the family home. When you say, I shouldn't feel this way, whose rule book are you quoting? When you apologize for existing too loudly, whose peace are you protecting? Every phrase that constricts your truth was once a survival tool for someone who loved you, but you are not living in their world anymore, and your nervous system deserves an updated dictionary. Personal reflection. Speaking through their silence. There was a moment I remember vividly, sitting across from someone I cared about, trying to explain how I felt, and hearing myself speak in a family member's cadence. The same clipped tone, the same avoidance of vulnerability. It wasn't intentional, it was inherited. I was trying to be honest, but the language I used belonged to someone who had never been safe enough to be honest. Afterwards, I sat in silence, and it hit me. I had been translating my feelings into a dialect that could never carry their meaning. That was the moment I realized we don't just inherit their wounds, we inherit their words for pain. And those words are too small for what we're trying to heal. Healing began when I stopped trying to find new answers and instead started asking new questions. Questions like, whose voice is this? What tone does my nervous system think equals safety? Can I speak slower, softer, not to be gentle, but to be real? The courage to speak differently, changing your family language, is a radical act, not because it's rebellious, but because it redefines love. When you start to use words that include you, not just them, you alter the family field. You break the pattern of exile. It may trigger resistance, even ridicule, from those still fluent in the old grammar. But remember, they are not rejecting your truth. They are defending their safety. The old language once saved them. Speak differently, but hold compassion. You are not erasing their words. You are continuing their story, but in a dialect of peace. From ancestral echo to embodied expression. We've explored how language becomes lineage, how phrases turn into nervous system laws, and silence into the architecture of identity. We now move deeper into the body itself. Because to truly change your inherited language, you must understand how it's embodied. In Element 2, we'll explore the physiology of inherited speech, how ancestral tone activates your own autonomic responses, how breath, cadence, and posture mirror family survival strategies, and what neuroscience and polyvagal theory reveal about transgenerational regulation. We'll also introduce the first somatic drill of this episode, a mirror talk exercise to trace a phrase through your body and discover where it lives. This section deepens the descent into embodied linguistics, how the family voice becomes a physiological state. It integrates polyvagal theory, NSL, nervous system language, mirror neuron science, and epigenetic research. When we think of language, we imagine words, sentences, phrases, and conversation. But before language was sound, it was sensation. The human voice is not born in the mouth, it is born in the body. Every word begins as breath, as vibration, as a signal carried through the vagus nerve, the great messenger between brain and heart, voice and gut. Before we ever spoke our first sentence, our nervous systems were already fluent in the music of tone. So when we talk about inherited language, we are not just talking about what our families said. We are talking about what their nervous systems sang. Polyvagal mapping, the nervous system beneath the accent polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, describes how our autonomic nervous system continually scans the environment for cues of safety or threat, a process called neuroception. This scanning doesn't wait for words. It listens for tone, pace, and rhythm. When your mother or father said, "I'm not angry," but their jaw was tight and their voice clipped, your nervous system believed the tone, not the words. When your father or mother said, "Everything's fine," but his breath shortened and his shoulders stiffened, our body registered danger even while they spoke reassurance. You learned early that the meaning of words could not be trusted without tone, pace, and rhythm. That early calibration forms your polyvagal accent, a unique pattern of physiological responses shaped by your family's emotional climate. In sympathetic households, speech carries speed and intensity. In dorsal collapse households, quietness and constriction dominate. In ventral vagal state regulated homes, voices move fluidly, attuned, rhythmic, safe. By adulthood, you speak not only in your native language, but in your family's nervous system dialect. Breath as linguistic inheritance. Notice your breath when you speak about something difficult. Does it shorten? Does your chest tighten, as though you're bracing for correction? This is your family's emotional punctuation, inherited breath patterns that mark where silence was once required. In NSL, nervous system language, breath is not just physiology, it's punctuation. Each inhale invites safety, each exhale signals surrender. When those rhythms were repeatedly interrupted by shame, by threat, by ridicule, speech became coupled with vigilance. You learned to talk through tension rather than from ease. So even now, when you attempt to express a boundary, your breath may contract. It's not because you lack confidence, it's because your body remembers that speaking up once came at a price. Breath is the original family story, written not in sentences, but in sighs. Cadence and posture, the echo of ancestral survival strategies. Think about how your parents or grandparents carried themselves when they spoke. Was there a stoop, a forward lean, a tight jaw, a constant smile that didn't quite reach the eyes? These postural habits aren't random, they are embodied syntax, shaped by generations of adaptation. Posture dictates tone, tone dictates emotion, emotion dictates meaning. A family that endured hardship might speak with shoulders forward, braced for impact, voices low and measured. A lineage of overachievers might speak quickly and with precision, mirroring the hypervigilance required to maintain success. A family marked by silence might communicate in half sentences and half smiles, an unspoken code of containment. Each posture is a paragraph in your family's unspoken autobiography. When we begin to heal, we don't just change what we say, we change how we stand when we say it. The biology of mimicry, mirror neurons, and embodied grammar in 1996. Neuroscientists discovered mirror neurons, brain cells that activate both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing it. In essence, we feel what we witness. Children don't just mimic words, they internalize the nervous system state behind those words. When a caregiver soothes with genuine warmth, the child's mirror neurons encode calm. When a caregiver soothes through control, stop crying, you're fine, the child encodes conflict. Love equals suppression. Over time, this creates embodied grammar, the way we structure emotional expression based on what the body learned to mirror. Our syntax of safety becomes an imitation of what once worked to preserve connection. So when you find yourself saying, I'm sorry, for things that require no apology, or rushing to reassure others when they're upset, you're not being irrational, you're being ancestral. Your body is replaying the choreography of belonging. Epigenetics and the linguistic transmission of stress, modern science, is beginning to confirm what intuition and intergenerational psychology have long known. Our ancestors' emotional experiences leave biological traces. Studies on epigenetic inheritance, particularly research by Rachel Yehuda and colleagues, show that trauma alters gene expression related to stress regulation. Children and grandchildren of those exposed to war, famine, or persecution display higher cortisol reactivity and heightened threat detection, even when raised in safe environments. But what's less discussed is the linguistic expression of those biological shifts. Families marked by chronic stress develop a lexicon of hypervigilance, language that anticipates loss, guards against hope, or reduces vulnerability to maintain stability. Expressions like, don't jinx it, let's not get our hopes up, if you expect the worst, you'll never be disappointed. These are not pessimism, they are epigenetic idioms. They evolved as micro-regulations to manage inherited threat responses. Through repetition, they became cultural norms. You may even hear them as wisdom, until you realize they're ancestral stress responses masquerading as caution. The science of tone, how sound regulates the heart. Porges' later research found that the vagus nerve, which governs heart rate and facial expression, responds most positively to mid-frequency tones like those found in lullabies and gentle conversation. This means that when someone speaks kindly, your heart literally changes rhythm. It slows, synchronizing with perceived safety. Now imagine the opposite, sharp clipped tones or sudden silence. Your nervous system prepares for a threat before your mind can interpret why. That's why certain words or tones from childhood can still trigger panic or shame decades later, not because you're overreacting, but because your body's listening faster than your intellect. Tone is the nervous system's language of love or of alarm, and your family's tone became your nervous system's first teacher. Somatic drill, tracing a phrase through the body. Let's try something together, a short mirror talk drill from the NSL framework. It's called tracing the phrase. Choose a family phrase you remember vividly, something you heard often. Perhaps, don't be ungrateful. You'll understand when you're older. Stop crying before I give you something to cry about. Oh, say the phrase slowly out loud. Feel how it shapes your breath. Does your chest rise or fall? Do your shoulders tense? Does your jaw tighten? 3. Now whisper it as if you were speaking to your younger self. What happens to your body then? Does it soften or does something resist? Or, finally, rephrase it. Translate it into what your nervous system wishes to hear. For example, it's okay to feel upset, I'm here with you. Notice how that new phrase changes your physiology. The shift is subtle, but real. Your body responds not to logic, but to tone. This is the essence of transgenerational linguistic healing, rewriting the embodied scripts that regulate your sense of safety. Why the body must speak first. If you try to rewrite inherited language purely through intellect, you'll fail. Because language didn't enter through the intellect, it entered through the body. You can't think your way out of tension that was taught through tone. You must feel your way back into it, and then speak from within the sensation. This is why true linguistic healing is slow, tender work. It's less about changing vocabulary and more about changing vibration. It's the art of remembering that speech is sound before its meaning, and that meaning only transforms when the sound becomes safe. The voice as a bridge between worlds. Anthropologists studying oral traditions often describe language as a bridge between the seen and unseen, a tool that carries the emotional memory of a people. When we sing or speak consciously, we're not only communicating, we're translating energy. In this sense, your voice is ancestral technology. Every breath you take in awareness becomes a small act of transmutation, turning inherited tone into liberated resonance. You don't heal the family story by fighting it. You heal it by resounding it through a different frequency. Emotional resonance. How families regulate through sound. Every family develops a unique emotional resonance, a sonic fingerprint shaped by centuries of adaptation. Think of it as an internal tuning fork vibrating beneath the surface of words. When one person in the family raises their voice, the rest instinctively shift to match, speeding up, bracing, freezing, soothing. It's not personal, it's acoustic contagion. Our autonomic nervous systems are wired for synchrony. This is why the phrase, "don't take that tone with me," carries more truth than we realize. Tone is the message. It's a form of emotional transmission. We don't just inherit how our families speak, we inherit how their nervous systems respond to speech. And when that system is dysregulated, language becomes a form of self-defense rather than connection. Mirror neurons and emotional echoes. The discovery of mirror neurons gave scientific weight to something we've always intuited. We don't just learn through observation, we embody what we witness. When you heard anger in the home, your brain didn't only register the words, it simulated the experience. When you heard quiet tension, the kind that hides beneath politeness, your nervous system learned to anticipate the break in the silence before it happened. Over time, this creates an emotional echo loop. You don't just remember the family tone, you reproduce it automatically when similar emotional frequencies arise. That's why you might find yourself sighing like your mother or father, brother or sister, when they were frustrated, or sharpening your tone like your relative when you feel unseen. It's not imitation, it's neurobiological resonance. Your body is harmonizing with its earliest teachers. Polyvagal intergenerational mapping, when safety is inherited unevenly according to polyvagal theory. Our autonomic states, fight, flight, freeze, our social engagement determine how we use our voice. A family that lived primarily in sympathetic arousal, hypervigilance, alertness, anger, will produce speech marked by urgency and high pitch. A family that lives in dorsal collapse, hopelessness, fatigue, avoidance, will speak softly, slowly, often with downward intonation. These vocal patterns don't end with one generation. Infants entrain to their caregivers' autonomic states within months. Their vagal tone, the flexibility of their nervous system, is sculpted by the tone of the voices that surround them. So even before a child understands language, they have learned what safety sounds. And that template persists for life. When we later meet people who speak in our family's tone, calm or chaotic, we experience recognition. The nervous system says, "I know this frequency." But familiarity is not always safety. Sometimes it's simply memory masquerading as home. The voice is a regulator or a weapon. Your voice has two evolutionary purposes, communication and regulation. In a healthy system, these overlap. Your voice expresses emotion while helping you calm yourself and others. But when survival dominates, voice becomes armor. Families with unprocessed trauma often weaponize tone unconsciously, using sarcasm to deflect, sharpness to assert control, quietness to punish, or volume to maintain order. Children adapt by developing countertones, learning when to shrink their voice, when to mimic it, or when to disappear altogether. By adulthood, these adaptive voices become internal archetypes: the appeaser, the defender, the rescuer, the ghost. Each of them still speaks inside you, trying to keep you safe using ancient strategies no longer required. Recognizing this is not about blame. It's about reclaiming authorship of your voice. You inherited the dialect, but you are the one who decides what story it tells next. How the body translates family emotion into physiology. When a caregiver says, "stop crying," the child's body releases cortisol, a stress hormone, while simultaneously suppressing the natural release of oxytocin, the bonding chemical. That neurochemical pairing wires the association. Emotional expression equals threat to the connection. Now imagine generations of such interactions, a lineage taught to suppress vulnerability. The descendants carry not only emotional restraint, but biological restraint, tight chests, shallow breathing, digestive issues, and muscle contraction. We call this family temperament. Science calls it transgenerational regulation. It's not metaphorical, it's measurable. Researchers like Moshe Sif and Michael Meany found that maternal stress changes methylation patterns in offspring, altering how genes involved in stress response express themselves. In human terms, our family's fear literally modifies how our body handles fear. And when we speak, that chemistry shapes our tone. Your voice becomes the audible version of your ancestors' survival story, inherited empathy, and the biology of overattunement. If you grew up decoding tone to survive, learning to sense anger before it erupted, you likely developed hyperempathy. Your mirror neurons are overactive. Your nervous system is finely tuned to others' microsignals. This can feel like intuition, but it's often vigilance in disguise. You read subtle cues not to connect, but to protect. It's exhausting and it's generational. Many descendants of trauma survivors carry this gift curse, the ability to feel everything yet struggle to feel safe in themselves. They are the emotional translators of the lineage, those who unconsciously regulate everyone else's nervous systems at the cost of their own. Recognizing this pattern is the first step in reclaiming your empathy as choice, not compulsion. You were never meant to be the emotional thermostat of your family. From mimicry to mastery, reclaiming the right to sound different healing, the physiology of inherited language isn't about rejecting your family's tone. It's about creating enough nervous system safety to expand beyond it. That expansion begins with resonance awareness, noticing the vibrational difference between the voice of survival and the voice of authenticity. The former speaks fast, tight, and predictably. The latter moves slowly, unpredictably, alive. This doesn't mean you must always speak softly or calmly. It means your tone becomes a choice again, not an inheritance. You reintroduce freedom into your frequency. Every time you catch yourself mirroring an ancestral tone and choose to exhale first, you interrupt a 1,000-year pattern. That's not small, that's systemic evolution. Personal reflection. The moment my voice changed, there was a point, recording one of my Inversiverse episodes, when I caught myself tightening my throat mid-sentence. I paused the microphone. It wasn't fatigue, it was fear. I realized I was unconsciously bracing for the internal critic I'd internalized from years of overcorrection. I took a breath, slow, deliberate, and dropped my tone lower. The words that followed felt entirely different, slower, fuller, less performative. In that moment, I understood that my body wasn't resisting my message, it was resisting a ghost. The echo of being told to tone it down. That pause became a new ritual, a micro-act of reclamation. Each time I catch my throat tighten, I whisper silently, "This voice is mine now." And something unclenches, not only in me, but in the lineage that taught me to hide behind volume or vanish into silence. The somatic bridge, listening for resonance, not perfection. As you begin to explore your own vocal inheritance, remember, you are not trying to perfect your tone, you are trying to befriend it. Each tremor, each pause, each crack is part of the release. You're not rehearsing a new self, you're remembering an old freedom. Sit with your own sound the way you'd sit with an elder who's finally ready to speak. Patiently, tenderly, without rushing to fix what time itself is unraveling. Because your healing does not end when you sound healed. It begins when you sound honest. From embodied language to inherited truths. We've traveled through the body's version of the family story, the breath patterns, tones, and rhythms that hold the emotional DNA of generations. We've seen how mirror neurons, vagal tone, and epigenetics weave together the science of belonging. But now we enter a subtler dimension, the psychological myths hidden inside those family words. Because not every phrase you inherited was true. Some were control disguised as care. Some were fear dressed as wisdom. Some were silent, mistaken for strength. In the next section, we unravel these myths and meet the shadow of family speech, the point where love and control become indistinguishable, where the story of who we are was written to protect the family image rather than the individual soul. Element 3. Linguistic trauma and the myth of family truth. When love and control speak the same language, every family has a native tongue, and not the one printed in textbooks, but the one that vibrates underneath every word. It's a language of survival, repetition, and ritual. And like all languages, it carries rules, what can be said, how it must be said, and what silence must protect. For many of us, that language was our first form of love, but it was also our first form of control. The same phrases that soothed us as children, "Don't cry," "You're fine," "We just want what's best for you," often became the scaffolding of suppression. What we learned to call care was often containment. What we were told was that respect sometimes meant invisibility. This is the paradox of family language. It's built from both affection and fear, tenderness and threat. And because it's delivered by people who loved us, it takes years to see where love ended and loyalty to their pain began. The double binding of the family story. In psychology, a double bind is a situation where every possible choice leads to guilt or loss. Family language often functions this way. If you speak your truth, you're accused of disloyalty. If you stay silent, you betray yourself. Either way, you fracture somewhere, inwardly or outwardly. Many families unconsciously weaponize these binds through language that sounds nurturing, but enforces emotional obedience. We're only hard on you because we care. You know we love you, even if we don't say it. Don't make things harder for us. Each of these sentences appears harmless, even well-meaning, but carries an invisible clause. Our comfort depends on your compliance. Over time, that message seeps into your self-talk. You learn to narrate your emotions in terms of permission rather than authenticity. Am I allowed to feel this instead of what am I feeling? The inner narrator becomes bilingual, fluent in self-expression, but constantly translating through the dialect of fear. The family myth as a nervous system defense, every lineage tells a story about itself. We're strong, we're survivors. We don't give up. These myths are not lies, they are defense mechanisms, ways the nervous system preserves coherence after generations of chaos. When tragedy or abuse occurs, the family must rewrite the narrative to continue functioning. They say, that's just how things were back then, or we don't talk about that, it's in the past. What's unspoken is the pain underneath. We can't bear to feel this again. But when you inherit that language, you also inherit the unprocessed emotion it's hiding. Your body starts to shake at the words your family uses casually. The phrase "we're fine" becomes a trigger, not a comfort. That's because your nervous system senses the lie long before your mind does. In linguistic trauma, the wound isn't just what was said, it's what was pretended to be true. Cognitive dissonance, the clash between words and felt sense. Cognitive dissonance occurs when what we hear contradicts what we feel. Children experience this constantly in emotionally dishonest environments. When a parent smiles through clenched teeth and says, "Everything's okay," the child's brain faces an impossible choice. Trust the words or trust the body. To maintain attachment, the lifeline of safety, they hide with the words. But the body never forgets. It continues to feel the dissonance as anxiety, confusion, or self-doubt. By adulthood, that conflict has matured into a chronic identity split, the external self that repeats the family script, and the internal self that quietly whispers, "Something's not right." This is how generational gaslighting perpetuates, not through overt manipulation, but through linguistic contradiction repeated until it feels like home. And so, even in your own relationships, you might find yourself saying, "It's fine," when it's not, or minimizing your needs because naming them feels like betrayal. The echo isn't emotional immaturity, it's inherited dissonance. MLH analysis, control phrases disguised as care. Let's look at a few common examples through the lens of mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH. Our language acts as both a reflection and a regulator of the nervous system. Each of these phrases contains two messages, the literal meaning and the emotional command hidden beneath. Don't be dramatic, literal meaning, calm down. Emotional command, your emotions are dangerous, my comfort matters more. We're fine, literal meaning, no need to worry. Emotional command, don't disturb the family's illusion of stability. That's just how we are, literal meaning, this behaviour is normal. Emotional command, don't ask for change, compliance is tradition. You always have to make things about you. Literal meaning, you're self-centered. Emotional command, your needs disrupt the family dynamic, shrink to fit. These phrases are the invisible glue of family identity, cognitive restraints disguised as common sense. They maintain the illusion of unity by silencing difference. And when repeated for decades, they form what I call linguistic trauma loops, phrases so deeply woven into the collective nervous system that they activate physiological responses even when no conflict is present. That tightening in your stomach when someone says, "Don't start," that's not overreaction. That's the sound of your lineage being summoned. When the family story becomes a scripted reality, families maintain coherence by editing memory. Events that don't fit the narrative are either softened, reframed, or erased. This process is not malicious, it's survival. But the cost of that survival is authenticity. You might remember something vividly, a fight, a betrayal, a silence, and hear someone else insist, "That never happened." Or worse, you're remembering it wrong. These phrases fracture time itself. They gaslight not only your memory but your biology. Because your body did remember, through tension, insomnia, and emotional reactivity. But your family's linguistic field denied that memory space to exist. Over time, you learn to doubt your own perception. You adopt the family's consensus reality to belong. This is what I call the myth of family truth, a collectively rehearsed illusion that prioritizes harmony over honesty. It sounds like love, but it costs your ability to trust your own nervous system. The emotional cost of unexamined idioms. Every family has its idioms, stock phrases that compress generations of experience into shorthand. But unexamined idioms can become prisons. Boys don't cry. Don't air our dirty laundry. We're not a family that gives up. They sound simple, yet beneath them lie layers of repressed grief, pride, and denial. They were once protective, small linguistic spells cast to ward off pain or social shame. But passed down unexamined, they become what linguists call fossilized expressions, emotionally dead phrases still controlling living people. You might carry these like heirlooms, polishing them into your speech without realizing they were never meant for this century or this version of you. Every time you catch yourself repeating one, pause. You're not failing, you're excavating. You've just found a linguistic fossil, evidence of an emotional species your lineage no longer needs to survive. Personal reflection. The moment the myth cracked, I remember sitting at a family gathering years ago, listening to a familiar phrase, "We don't talk about that." It had always been said kindly, a velvet rope across the doorway of discomfort. But that day, something in me stirred. I realized the phrase wasn't protecting anyone. It was protecting the myth that all was fine. It was the same sentence that had prevented grief from becoming conversation, and conversation from becoming healing. That was the moment the myth cracked. I didn't challenge it outright. I simply stayed silent, but not compliant, breathing slower, grounding my body, allowing the discomfort to exist in me without folding. And that silence spoke louder than any argument. Healing didn't start when I changed their minds. It started when I stopped needing their story to match mine. From recognition to reclamation. We've unmasked the hidden commands in family phrases and explored how cognitive dissonance maintains loyalty through confusion. But awareness alone doesn't free the tongue. To truly heal linguistic trauma, you must not only see the myth, but you must rewrite your role within it. That's where the next part of this element takes us. We'll examine how identity is constructed through language, how generational stories persist as neurological blueprints, and how reclaiming speech becomes the act that reprograms belonging itself. From recognition to rewriting, the risk of speaking differently, realizing that the language you grew up with isn't neutral feels like standing outside your own house for the first time. You see the walls from a distance, how the structure was built to keep you safe, yes, but also how the windows were placed to restrict what could be seen. To speak differently, to say what was once unsayable, is to risk exile from that house. Families rarely punish directly. The consequence is subtler, a pause, a sigh, a sudden coldness. You haven't said anything wrong. You've simply disturbed the frequency. It's the nervous system's version of cultural shock. You're speaking in a new tone that your lineage hasn't learned to interpret as safety yet. They hear your healing as rebellion. But you are not defying the family. You are evolving it. When you choose honest language over inherited politeness, you're not breaking the bloodline. You're reintroducing truth into its vocabulary. Identity as grammar. How the family scripts the self. Our earliest identities are grammatical. They form in response to how we are spoken to, the verbs used about us, and the adjectives that define us. You're clever. You're difficult. You're too sensitive. Each phrase becomes a sentence in the autobiography you didn't write. Language is not passive description, it is active creation. By the time we reach adolescence, most of us are fluent in our family's pronouns. We for unity, I for selfishness, they for danger. When you begin to individuate, your grammar changes. You start saying, I need, I feel. That doesn't work for me. To a family system rooted in fusion, this shift sounds like aggression. To them, you've gone off script. But to your nervous system, you've finally begun to narrate in your own syntax. This is the beginning of linguistic individuation, the reclaiming of voice as sovereign territory. Inherited syntax of silence, the ghost in the dialogue. Many families maintain unity not through conversation, but through coordinated avoidance. There's an unspoken agreement. We won't say it if you don't. It's a linguistic ceasefire, peace through suppression. But silence has grammar too, the long pause before a name. The subject switched mid-sentence. The word anyway is used as a weapon of redirection. In such homes, truth is exiled but never gone. It lingers like static. The children learn to fill in the blanks intuitively, feeling what was too dangerous to articulate. These unspoken clauses become phantom sentences that haunt adult communication. They appear in moments of conflict when we say, forget it. It's not important. You wouldn't understand. But what we really mean is, I was never taught how to end a silence without starting a war. Healing means giving voice to the ghosts, letting the unspoken find words at last, even if the ones who silence them never learn to listen. Why it hurts to tell the truth. When you begin telling the truth in a system built on repression, pain is inevitable. Not because truth is cruel, but because it activates buried nervous system memories of threat. The family's safety depends on everyone speaking in code. You start speaking in clarity, and so the old alarms sound. Your tone is called too much. Your timing is inappropriate. Your honesty is selfish. In reality, what they mean is, we don't know how to stay regulated in the presence of authenticity. You are not hurting them by speaking truthfully. You are exposing how fragile their illusion of calm truly is. That discomfort is not failure. It is the friction of generational recalibration. The neurology of suppression. Why the body trembles when we speak up. Neuroscientific studies on memory and speech, such as those by Bessel van der Kolk, show that when trauma-related stories are told for the first time, the brain regions responsible for speech broker's area temporarily deactivate. The body shakes because it's processing sensory memories that language is only beginning to hold. This means that trembling when you confront family myths is not weakness, it's proof of integration. Your body is literally rewiring. What was once encoded as danger is now being translated into narrative, and with each telling, the signal of threat weakens, replaced by coherence. The family story that once lived in tension becomes something else: articulation, agency, and peace. Inherited illusions, the family as fictional author. When we outgrow the family story, guilt often arrives disguised as grief. You mourn not only the people, but the identity you played in their script. For years, you might have been the good one, the black sheep, or the peacemaker. Each role existed to maintain the equilibrium of a system that couldn't tolerate uncertainty. But as you evolve, those labels no longer fit. Your nervous system begins to crave a new narrative, one that values wholeness over harmony. And that transition feels like betrayal, even when it's the truth. Because the myth of family truth isn't just external, it's internal. It's the author's voice that lives inside you, whispering lines you no longer believe, but still feel obligated to repeat. The moment you stop reciting them, silence falls, and in that silence, you meet yourself again. The healing language of permission. To rewrite the family script, you don't have to burn the old book. You only need to write new pages in your own hand. Give yourself linguistic permission slips, phrases that restore sovereignty where suppression once lived. It's safe for me to say no. My truth doesn't need their approval. I can love them without repeating them. Each of these statements signals your nervous system that expression is no longer a threat. And when you repeat them consistently, your vagus nerve begins to trust that safety can coexist with honesty. This is how generational repair begins, not through confrontation, but through consistent nervous system reassurance. Personal reflection, reclaiming my own language. There was a time when I softened my sentences instinctively, as though each word needed a cushion before it landed. That was my family's linguistic inheritance, to make truth palatable so no one felt discomfort. But one evening, while writing a section much like this, I caught myself editing mid-thought, diluting what I meant to protect the imaginary reactions of people not even present. It struck me, I wasn't editing for clarity, I was editing for permission. So I stopped. I let the sentence stand unsoftened, honest, slightly uncomfortable, and when I read it back, I felt my body exhale. The tension I'd mistaken for empathy was actually fear. The politeness I'd been praised for as a child had become the prison of my adult voice. That night, the rewrite became literal, not just on the page, but in the nervous system itself. Transcending the myth, speaking without needing to be believed. The final stage of linguistic healing is detachment from outcome. You speak not to convince, but to reclaim. The words no longer need validation to be true. That is freedom, when your nervous system no longer trembles waiting for permission to exist. And when your family story is retold at gatherings and the familiar half-truths resurface, you can smile gently, not out of superiority, but sovereignty. You understand now. Their version was never wrong, only incomplete. Yours doesn't erase theirs, it completes the circle. That is how ancestral healing speaks, not through vengeance, but through voice. The grammar of guilt and loyalty. So far, we've traced how linguistic trauma hides in family idioms and myths. We've seen how truth-telling can feel like rebellion, even when it's love. But the next layer of this inheritance runs deeper still: guilt. The invisible gravity that keeps us orbiting around outdated speech, traditions, and tonalities even long after we know they hurt. Because language is not only communication, it's a form of belonging. To change how we speak is to risk exile from those who taught us. And yet to never change is to remain half alive in our own voice. This section explores the psychological mechanics of guilt and loyalty, how inherited tone, family myths, and attachment needs bind us to outdated speech patterns. It draws on attachment theory, generational trauma research, and NSL, nervous system language principles to illuminate why it feels dangerous to speak differently. Element 4, psychological insight, the generational grammar of guilt and loyalty. Every family teaches grammar long before words. It's the grammar of gestures, who's allowed to speak first, whose feelings take precedence, which silences must be kept sacred. It's invisible, but everyone knows the rules. The invisible grammar of guilt, the enforcer of guilt, is grammar. It ensures the continuity of the family's emotional language, long after logic would suggest change. You can feel it whenever you try to say something new. Your throat tightens, your breath shortens, your tone softens instinctively, not out of fear of rejection, but out of ancestral reflex. In polyvagal terms, guilt triggers a submissive appeasement state, the nervous system's attempt to maintain proximity by preempting disapproval. It's an evolutionary remnant. Once exile meant death. Now it means distance, yet the body still responds as though love is on the line. So when you find yourself apologizing for existing differently, that's not weakness. It's loyalty encoded as tone. Inherited scripts of belonging. Most family systems don't teach love through affirmation. They teach it through repetition. To belong is to sound familiar. To be accepted, you must speak in the emotional dialect of your ancestors, not just the words, but the rhythm, the register, the restraint. They went through worse. Be grateful. We have to toughen up. These aren't simply phrases. They're behavioral contracts. They reinforce survival logic disguised as virtue. The hidden message beneath be grateful isn't humility, it's hierarchy. It says don't see the pain we couldn't face. Beneath, they went through worse, lies a nervous system economy. Your suffering threatens our self-image. Minimize it for our sake. In such families, guilt becomes a currency. The cost of belonging is self-abandonment. And we pay it willingly, because to speak differently feels like betrayal. The neuropsychology of familial loyalty attachment theory teaches that the need for connection outweighs the need for truth, especially in early development. A child will distort reality before they risk losing love. That distortion often takes linguistic form, adopting the caregiver's tone even when it feels wrong. If a parent communicates affection through sarcasm, the child learns that mockery equals safety. If love is conditional on calmness, the child learns that emotion equals danger. By adulthood, these linguistic adaptations form internalized attachment languages. Anxious types over-explain, seeking regulation through approval. Avoidant types speak in brevity, withholding warmth to protect independence. Disorganized types alternate between apology and protest, speaking love and threat in the same breath. It's not personality, it's linguistic survival architecture. The words we choose mirror the regulatory patterns our bodies learned in proximity to our caregivers. This is why the work of nervous system healing is inseparable from the work of language repair. You cannot rewire your body without rephrasing your belonging. Tone as a lineage marker. Tone is the accent of the nervous system. It carries generational memory, the tremor of war, the tempo of scarcity, the pause of grief unspoken. Anthropologist Ruth Bahar once wrote that tone is the residue of emotion turned to ritual. We inherit not only our family's words, but the emotional cadence of their survival stories. When an elder says, "We just get on with it," listen closely to the rhythm. There's often a catch, a micro-hesitation where the body remembers what getting on with it cost. Tone is where history hides. And when you start speaking differently, slower, softer, more curious, you're not just changing your style, you're interrupting ritual. That interruption is sacred. It's how the lineage evolves from reaction to reflection. The guilt of evolving beyond survival. Many people unconsciously carry what psychotherapist Mark Woolen calls inherited guilt, a transgenerational sense of debt to those who suffered before us. It's the guilt of healing faster than our parents, of finding peace they never could. It manifests in language. You start to self-sabotage your calm with apologetic phrasing, as though serenity itself were arrogance. You feel wrong for resting when they never did. You temper joy with disclaimers, saying things like, "I know I'm lucky," just to reassure the ghosts of deprivation that you haven't forgotten them. But guilt isn't gratitude. It's the nervous system's confusion between empathy and obligation. You can honor the struggles of your ancestors without inheriting their suffering as your syntax. Evolution doesn't dishonor the past, it redeems it. Family tone as a nervous system colony picture. A family as a colony of nervous systems co-regulating through shared language. The calmest member becomes the stabilizer, the angriest the enforcer, the quietest the keeper of peace. Each role serves the system's equilibrium, even if dysfunction is functional if it prevents collapse. Now imagine one person begins to heal, to slow their speech, breathe differently, respond instead of react. The colony senses the change as a threat. Not because healing is wrong, but because coherence is shifting. And so guilt arises again, the body's way of asking, can I survive being different from them? The answer, though hard one, is yes. Because every regulated breath you take becomes new air for the lineage to breathe, whether they recognize it or not. You don't have to convince the colony to evolve. You only have to hold your frequency long enough for resonance to do its quiet work. Personal reflection, the echo of my own guilt. For a long time, I mistook my restraint for maturity. I thought biting my tongue was emotional intelligence. It wasn't. It was the guilt of surpassing the emotional literacy I grew up around. Whenever I expressed myself clearly, I felt a shadow whisper. Who do you think you are to speak so freely? That whisper wasn't mine. It belonged to generations who equated silence with survival. And when I finally recognized that, I realized something profound. My freedom wasn't betrayal. It was continuation. The voice that learned to whisper in them was finally learning to sing in me. That reframe changed everything. What once felt like arrogance became reverence, an act of honoring through evolution. The body's language of loyalty. We've heard how guilt polices speech and how tone encodes belonging. But the next layer of this grammar lives in the body itself. The second half of this element explores how our physiology enacts loyalty through breath, posture, pacing, and how to translate guilt into gratitude without collapsing back into silence. We'll also examine the paradox of loyal disobedience, how speaking differently can become the purest form of love a lineage has ever known. The body speaks the family language. Before we could talk, our bodies were already fluent in the grammar of our environment. Every sigh, every flinch, every way we held our shoulders, these were sentences in an unspoken dialect. Our nervous systems tuned themselves to the emotional pitch of the household. If tension rose, we learned to shrink. If chaos came, we learned to anticipate. If affection arrived only through achievement, we learned to perform calmness. Over time, these adjustments became posture. The anxious child became the adult who apologizes mid-sentence. The avoidant child became the adult whose breath never quite reaches their belly. And the disorganized child became the adult who speaks both lightning and fog, oscillating between oversharing and retreat. This is how the family tongue becomes embodied. We don't just inherit our ancestors' phrases, we inherit their physiology of speech, loyalty as a nervous system reflex. To understand why it's so hard to speak differently, we must see guilt not as a moral flaw but as a body-based reflex. Loyalty is stored not in belief but in the vagus nerve. Whenever we approach a truth our lineage avoided, the body interprets it as danger. You might feel your throat close, your heart race, your stomach twist. It's not the words that scare you, it's the potential disconnection they symbolize. Our biology evolved to equate social exclusion with death. So when you speak in a tone your ancestors never used, when you say I need, or that hurt me, your body may react as though you've broken an ancient law. This is the somatic guilt response, a vestige of survival, now misfiring in the age of self-awareness. But there's a quiet truth underneath it. You are not betraying them. You are updating through evolution. Why breaking patterns feels like betrayal psychologically, family systems operate like ecosystems. Every role and reaction sustains equilibrium. When one person heals, the ecosystem destabilizes. That's why growth rarely feels like relief at first. It feels like guilt, alienation, even arrogance. Who am I to want more? Who am I to speak differently when they can't? These are not your true questions, they are ancestral echoes. The lineage speaks through you, asking whether you'll abandon the script or rewrite it with compassion. In internal family systems, IFS terms, this is your protector voice, the part that guards connection by maintaining conformity. But protectors are loyal, not logical. Their devotion can outlive its usefulness. When you acknowledge them, thank you for keeping me safe by keeping me quiet, the guilt begins to soften. Because loyalty, when witnessed, doesn't need to police you anymore. The tension between love and liberation. Many of us grow up believing that love and obedience are synonyms. We confuse compliance with care, silence with peace, sameness with loyalty. So when we begin to individuate, it feels like both loss and liberation. The paradox is this. You can love your family deeply and still need to speak differently. In fact, authentic love requires it. When we suppress our evolution to preserve belonging, we love through fear, and fear cannot sustain empathy. But when we speak from grounded honesty, we love through truth, and truth, though uncomfortable, can become the soil of generational repair. This is what I call loyal disobedience, the sacred act of remaining connected while refusing to perpetuate harm. It's the adult child saying to the ancestral field, I honor what you survived, and I choose to live differently so the survival you earned can finally become peace. That is not rebellion. That is devotion transformed into consciousness. The mirror moment, seeing the family in yourself. There's often a moment in healing where you catch yourself using their words mid-sentence and realize you've become the echo you tried to escape. It can feel disheartening, even shameful, but that moment is sacred. It's proof that the pattern has surfaced for rewriting. When I first caught myself using a tone that wasn't mine, sharp, dismissive, inherited from years of emotional armor, my instinct was to apologize. Instead, I paused. I asked, whose voice just spoke through me? The answer came quietly. My father's frustration, my mother's exhaustion, my grandparents' fear. That recognition dissolved the shame. I wasn't broken. I was bilingual in the languages of trauma and transformation. And that awareness changed how I heard others too. Suddenly, even hurtful words sounded like translations, imperfect attempts at love. The same empathy I denied myself began to extend outward, rehumanizing everyone in the lineage, myself included, turning guilt into gratitude. The goal is not to eliminate guilt, but to alchemize it. Guilt reminds us that we come from somewhere, that our story is not self-created, but co-authored by countless others. Through NSL, nervous system language, we can reinterpret guilt not as punishment, but as a signal of growth in progress. When the throat tightens, it means new speech is forming. When the chest burns, it means truth is entering the bloodstream. When the voice shakes, it means the lineage is releasing tension through you. This reframing transforms guilt into gratitude. You are no longer carrying their pain. You are processing it. Every tremor becomes a prayer of release. And gratitude, when embodied, restores coherence where guilt once constricted. Personal reflection, when I finally stopped justifying. There came a time when I realized every sentence I spoke to my family included a justification. I couldn't simply say, I feel this. I had to cushion it with, but don't worry, or I know you did your best. That wasn't kindness. It was fear disguised as diplomacy. The day I stopped over-explaining, something broke and something opened. The silence that followed was heavy, but clean. The air of a room finally ventilated. For the first time, my voice didn't tremble waiting for acceptance. They didn't change, but I did, and that was enough. Because speaking from peace, not guilt, doesn't demand understanding, only integrity. From guilt to generativity, evolving the lineage. When you evolve your speech, you offer your lineage something they couldn't access, a nervous system that can hold complexity without collapsing. That's how transgenerational trauma becomes transgenerational tenderness. It's not through confrontation, but through continuity with consciousness. You remain connected, but on a new frequency. Your love matures from protection to permission. And one day, maybe in a small moment, a softer tone, a deeper breath, a child listening without fear, you'll feel the lineage exhale. That's the miracle of linguistic healing. It doesn't erase the past. It teaches it to rest. Towards reauthoring the family tongue, we've uncovered how guilt sustains generational grammar, how tone carries belonging, and how the nervous system enforces linguistic loyalty, even when the mind longs for change. But awareness, though essential, is not the destination. To truly heal, the new language must be lived, spoken, embodied, and practiced. The next and final element of this episode is where that integration unfolds. We'll move from insight to invocation, rewriting inherited phrases through NSL and MLH techniques, translating ancestral tension into tenderness. Because healing is not about rejecting the voices we came from. It's about teaching them how to speak through us, differently this time. Element 5, integration and benediction, reauthoring the family tongue. At the end of every lineage story, there is a moment of choice, not between love and distance, but between repetition and evolution. The nervous system can only serve one master at a time, fear or freedom. To reauthor the family tongue is to choose freedom without erasing love. Language as ceremony, the return to voice. This work is not about linguistic aesthetics. It's not about sounding wiser or softer or more healed. It's about teaching your body that the words leaving your mouth no longer need to carry ancestral threat codes. Every phrase becomes a prayer of permission. Every breath before speech becomes a sacred pause, the small silence that separates inheritance from intention. Because you don't truly find your voice. You remember it, the 4 stages of reauthoring NSL plus MLH integration 1. Listen, hearing the echo before it speaks. Before rewriting, you must first listen. Not just to what you say, but to what your tone hides. In NSL, nervous system language, listening means tracking your inner tempo before sound forms, noticing whether your breath is shallow, your chest tight, your pacing quick. Each physiological cue is a pre-verbal word. When your pulse rises, your body is saying, I'm preparing to defend. When your jaw sets, it's whispering, I'm afraid to be misunderstood. This is the inner pre-speech scan. You can't change your words until you can hear the nervous system rehearsing them. Pause before you speak to a family member. Ask, who's about to talk me or my ancestry? The answer reveals the ghost behind the sentence. 2. Locate, finding the phrase in the body. The second stage is somatic mapping. Take one inherited phrase, something like, don't make a fuss, or we don't talk about that, or you'll understand when you're older. Now speak it aloud and notice, where does it land? Does your stomach tighten? Does your throat close? Does your breath shorten? That's where the lineage lives. The phrase isn't just cognitive, it's muscular. It's a small contraction of inherited survival. To locate it is to loosen its authority. The body becomes a translation tool, an oracle, not an obstacle. 3. Loosen, decoding the grammar of control. Once you've located the phrase, you can start to loosen it. Ask the MLH question, the mirror linguistic inversion. What truth was this sentence trying to protect me from? Maybe don't make a fuss actually means we were punished for expressing pain. Maybe be grateful means we were terrified of losing what little we had. Maybe that's just how we are means we never learned another way. When you decode the survival logic beneath the sentence, compassion floods in. The phrase loses its power to shame because you've uncovered its origin story. You're not defying your ancestors. You're translating them back into safety. 4. Language speaking the rewritten sentence. Finally, you replace the phrase not with toxic positivity, but with regulated reality. For instance, don't make a fuss becomes, it's safe for me to express discomfort. Be grateful becomes, I can appreciate what I have and still desire change. We're fine becomes, we're surviving and we deserve more than survival. These rewrites might sound simple, but they are neurological interventions. Each one tells your vagus nerve a new story about safety and self-permission. Over time, these phrases become the muscle memory of authenticity. The living example translating my own lineage, I remember the first time I said to myself, it's okay to feel small and still speak. It was a rewrite of the oldest phrase in my bloodline, don't draw attention to yourself. That ancestral warning had kept generations safe, under harsh authority, under poverty, under the illusion that humility meant invisibility. But in the modern nervous system, it had become a cage. When I replaced it with it's okay to feel small and still speak, I felt a quiet tremor in my spine as if my ancestors were listening, confused but curious. It wasn't a rebellion, it was a dialogue. That's what this work really is, a conversation across time. Healing is a multilingual act. Your words, their echoes, the silence between. You do not banish your lineage, you invite it to evolve with you. When forgiveness isn't a word, but a frequency, forgiveness is often misunderstood as excusing harm. In truth, it's a nervous system recalibration, the point at which you stop using pain as your dialect. Forgiveness is when your tone no longer trembles at the thought of them. It's when your breath deepens where it once tightened. It's when your vocabulary stops orbiting their validation. And in that calm, a subtle miracle happens. You start speaking not about your family, but to them, energetically, ancestrally, sometimes through dreams or breath or memory. The conversation becomes harmonic, not defensive. You are no longer arguing with ghosts. You are harmonizing the lineage into coherence. Linguistic alchemy in practice. Let's take 3 examples of linguistic alchemy, where language transfigures trauma into tenderness. 1. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Becomes, your tears are welcome here. They remind me that feeling is living. 2. We don't talk about family business outside this house. Comes, some stories deserve sunlight. Secrecy was their first wound. 3. You think you're better than us. Comes, you are expanding beyond what we knew, and that expansion honors us. Each rewrite creates new neuro-linguistic associations between safety and authenticity. They become emotional antibodies, defending against shame without attacking its source. When you speak them aloud, you are not only healing yourself, you are re-sculpting the energetic field of your family's story. That's the quiet metaphysics of language. Each syllable reorganizes the nervous system's perception of belonging. The mirror talk drill. Whose words am I choosing to keep alive? Here's a ritual you can return to whenever guilt or inherited speech resurfaces. 1. Write down a phrase that still lives rent-free in your nervous system. E.g., you're too emotional. Say it aloud and observe your body's micro-responses. Where does tension gather? What emotion rises first? Anger, sadness, shame? 3. Ask the mirror question. Whose words am I choosing to keep alive when I repeat this? 4. Rewrite the phrase from a regulated state. E.g., my emotions are valid information, not interruptions. 5. Speak the new version aloud while breathing slowly. Notice how the tone of your body changes. This is the embodied rewriting of language, not therapy in theory, but alchemy in real time. You're not just changing words, you're re-encoding your nervous system's sense of what love sounds like. A spoken ritual for lineage peace, for all I honor the voices I came from by evolving the language they could not. I thank the silences that protected me, and I release the fear they taught me. I keep what was wise. I return what was wounded. My mouth does not belong to history's hurt, it belongs to love's continuation. I am allowed to speak differently. I am allowed to be heard without harm. I am allowed to be the first in my bloodline to speak calmly in truth. This is not a goodbye to your ancestors. It's a new dialect of devotion, a language they could never learn in time, but one you are learning for all of you now. Let it end not in punctuation, but in breath, a small, sustained inhale of forgiveness that fills the lungs with peace. Closing reflection. When the lineage learns to listen. When you heal through language, you become the bridge between what was and what could be. The voice that trembled in your grandmother now steadies in you. The silence that swallowed now speaks softly in your tone. The apology that never came is rewritten in your calm. This is what transgenerational linguistic healing really means, not the erasure of pain, but the transformation of its frequency. You are both student and teacher, ancestor and descendant. Your nervous system becomes the meeting place of history and hope. And one day, when someone younger hears you speak with honesty untainted by guilt, they won't just learn your words. They'll learn your regulation. That is how a new family language is born. We have now completed the journey through inherited tongues, the exploration of how language carries ancestral imprint, and how healing begins not in speaking louder, but in speaking slower. So as we come to the end of this episode, I take a few words to discuss what coming next, language itself becomes the labyrinth. In episode 23, Double Binds, No-Win Scripts and Finding Sovereignty Through Syntax, we'll explore the paradoxes that trap us between competing truths, how to break from manipulative phrasing, conditional logic, and the contradictions that fracture both communication and consciousness. Because once you can rewrite your lineage's language, the next task is learning how to unravel the traps inside your own syntax. Until then, breathe gently, speak slowly, and remember, the words you use are not just communication, they're creation. May your voice become the place where old pain learns new peace. May your breath carry the dialect of freedom. And may every word you choose become a homecoming. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, you've been listening to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. I'm James Miller.